Listen carefully. Your life is not being destroyed by your enemies. It is being destroyed by your reactions. Every impulsive word, every emotional outburst, every desperate need to prove yourself is draining your power, weakening your focus, and delaying your future. Emotional restraint is not weakness. It is not silence born from fear. It is controlled force. It is the ability to stay calm when others break, to stay focused when others react, and to stay disciplined when your feelings beg for release. The people who master this become unshakable. The people who do not remain slaves to every trigger in the world. Chapter 1. Stop reacting like a slave. Let's begin with a hard truth. Most people are not in control of their lives. They think they are. They talk like they are. They post like they are. But they are not. They are controlled by moods. Controlled by triggers. Controlled by disrespect. Controlled by delays. Controlled by rejection. Controlled by other people's opinions. Controlled by one careless sentence from someone who does not even matter. That is not freedom. That is servitude. If they control your reaction, they control your life. Read that again in your mind. If they control your reaction, they control your life. This is where emotional restraint begins. Not with theory. Not with philosophy. With ownership. With the brutal recognition that every time someone pulls an emotion out of you without your permission, they take a piece of your power with them. You get insulted and you explode. You get ignored and you spiral. You get corrected and you become defensive. You get challenged and you lose focus. Now look at what just happened. Your peace is gone. Your clarity is gone. Your discipline is gone. And for what? For a moment. For a trigger. For a person who might not even remember the interaction tomorrow. One moment of reaction can cost years of progress. That is not an exaggeration. That is reality. A man loses his job because he could not control his mouth in one heated meeting. A woman destroys a promising relationship because every difficult conversation becomes an emotional war. A young man ruins his reputation online because he could not let one comment go unanswered. A business owner makes a reckless decision in anger and spends the next 3 years repairing what one impulsive hour destroyed. This is how lives get damaged. Not always through grand failure. Often through repeated, emotional carelessness. That is why this chapter is called Stop Reacting Like a Slave. Because slavery is not only chains on the body. It is chains on the mind. Chains on behavior. Chains on attention. Chains on response. If a stranger can provoke you with a comment, you are not free. If your partner can bait you into losing control every week, you are not free. If a coworker can throw off your entire day with one passive-aggressive sentence, you are not free. If a person on the internet can hijack your peace from a screen, you are not free. You have a choice. That's the key. You have a choice. Not after the damage is done. In the moment. Right there. In the heat. In the sting. In the discomfort. In the pressure. That is where your power lives. Most people never train that moment. They train expression. They train explanation. They train retaliation. They train defense. But they do not train restraint. And because they do not train restraint, they remain predictable. Easy to manipulate. Easy to provoke. Easy to control. You must become different. You must become the person who cannot be pulled out of position by every little thing. That does not mean you become passive. It does not mean you become weak. It does not mean you let people walk over you. It means you stop confusing emotional leakage with strength. Real strength is not loud. Real strength is not immediate. Real strength does not rush. Real strength does not panic. Real strength does not scream every time it feels pressure. Real strength stays in command. That is what emotional restraint is. It is not passive behavior. It is active dominance over the self. That's the key. Do not react. Observe. Decide. Then move. That is the sequence. Not react, regret, apologize, repair. Not react, justify, blame, repeat. Observe. Decide. Then move. You get the disrespectful message. Observe. You feel the anger rise. Observe. You notice the urge to prove yourself, to defend yourself, to send that long paragraph, to make sure they understand exactly how wrong they are. Observe. Now decide. Is this worth your peace? Is this worth your focus? Is this worth your future? Is this aligned with the person you say you want to become? Then move. Maybe you respond calmly. Maybe you set a boundary. Maybe you say nothing. Maybe you walk away. Maybe you leave the room. Maybe you end the relationship. Maybe you address the issue tomorrow instead of tonight. But whatever you do it from command, not compulsion. That changes everything. Let's make this practical. Imagine you are at work. You present an idea. Someone dismisses it carelessly. You feel embarrassed. The room shifts. Your ego lights up. Now you want to fire back. You want to show them you are not weak. You want to win the room. This is the trap. Because the emotional mind says, react now. The disciplined mind says, not yet. You have a choice. If they control your reaction, they control your life. So instead of snapping, you breathe. You stay still. You clarify your point without heat. Or you wait. You let the meeting finish. You address it privately, clearly, and without drama. Now look at the difference. Same insult. Different man. Same pressure. Different response. Same trigger. Different future. That's the key. Or take relationships. Someone you love says something careless. Maybe they are frustrated. Maybe they are unfair. Maybe they are wrong. And now the old version of you wants to react instantly. Raise your voice. Bring up the past. Turn one issue into 10. Win the argument and lose the trust. That is what slaves do. They serve the moment. But free people serve the mission. And the mission is not to win every emotional exchange. The mission is to protect what matters. The mission is to stay in control. The mission is to remain someone who can be trusted with power. One moment of reaction can cost years of progress. A relationship does not usually collapse in one explosion alone. It collapses because of a pattern. A pattern of unmanaged emotion. A pattern of careless words. A pattern of refusing to pause. You must break that pattern. And then there is online provocation. One of the clearest signs of emotional weakness in the modern world. People you have never met can drag you into rage, insecurity, comparison, and pointless conflict with a few words on a screen. They steal your time. They steal your focus. They steal your emotional energy. Why? Because you volunteered your mind. Because you reacted without discipline. Because you still believe every challenge requires a response. It does not. You don't need their permission to stay calm. You don't need their permission to ignore nonsense. You don't need their permission to remain above what is trying to pull you down. That's the key. A powerful life requires selective attention. Not every insult deserves your voice. Not every offense deserves your energy. Not every trigger deserves your reaction. Some things deserve silence. Some things deserve distance. Some things deserve a boundary. And some things deserve nothing at all. This is how you begin to reclaim authority over your life. You stop seeing triggers as emergencies. You start seeing them as tests. A test of ownership. A test of maturity. A test of identity. Who owns this moment? Your emotions, or you? Who decides what happens next? Your pain, or your principles? You have a choice. It's not about suppression, it's about discipline. It's not about pretending not to feel, it's about refusing to be ruled by what you feel. It's not about becoming cold, it's about becoming governed. That is the transformation. And make no mistake, people will notice. When you stop reacting impulsively, your presence changes. You become harder to manipulate, harder to bait, harder to read, harder to defeat. Because the world feeds on predictability. It feeds on your weak spots. It studies what makes you lose control. The moment you master that, the game changes. If they control your reaction, they control your life. But when they can no longer control your reaction, they lose access to your power. That is freedom. That is self-respect. That is mental toughness in its first true form. So from this point forward, watch yourself carefully. Watch what makes you flare up. Watch what makes you defensive. Watch what makes you desperate to respond. And in that moment, remember the law. Do not react. Observe. Decide. Then move. That is how you stop being ruled. That is how you stop being owned by every trigger in the world. That is how you begin to master yourself. You stopped worshipping the impulse. You started reclaiming command. Now let's go deeper, because restraint is not about feeling less. It is about showing less. Chapter 2. Feel everything, show less. Now we correct a dangerous misunderstanding. A lot of people hear the words emotional restraint and immediately think of suppression. They think of numbness. They think of coldness. They think of pretending not to care. That is not what this is. This is not about becoming a stone. This is about becoming solid. There is a difference. Weak people usually live on the surface of their emotions. They display everything. They leak everything. Every irritation enters the room before they do. Every insecurity gets announced. Every frustration gets transferred. Every mood becomes everybody else's burden. Strong people are different. They feel deeply, but they show less. That's the key. Depth is power. Display is weakness. Say that again. Depth is power. Display is weakness. You are not weak because you feel anger. You are weak when anger controls your mouth. You are not weak because you feel pain. You are weak when pain becomes your identity in every conversation. You are not weak because you feel pressure. You are weak when pressure spills into every decision, every tone, every relationship. You have a choice. You can feel something without broadcasting it. You can carry something without performing it. You can experience emotion without making it a spectacle. That is maturity. That is command. And in this chapter, you need to understand this deeply. Emotional restraint is not the absence of feeling. It is the refusal to become emotionally public in a careless way. You are allowed to feel it. You are not required to perform it. That line alone can change a life. Because most people were trained to do the opposite. They were trained to react outwardly the moment they feel something inwardly. Feel offended? Show it. Feel jealous? Show it. Feel disappointed? Show it. Feel stressed? Spread it. Feel insecure? Demand reassurance. Feel hurt? Make sure everyone knows. That pattern does not create relief. It creates weakness. And worse, it creates predictability. The more predictable your emotions are, the easier you are to manipulate. If people know exactly what gets under your skin, they own a map to your nervous system. If they know exactly how to make you defensive, jealous, needy, loud, or desperate, they can control the atmosphere around you whenever they want. That is why emotional privacy is a competitive advantage. Not because you are hiding, because you are governing. Feel deeply. Respond deliberately. That's the key. Look at the leader in a crisis. Everyone else is panicking. Voices rise. Decisions get rushed. Fear spreads. Confusion becomes contagious. And then one person enters the room with a steady face, a measured tone, and controlled energy. That person still feels the pressure. Do not misunderstand that. They feel the stakes. They feel the weight. They feel the urgency. But they do not spray that emotion across the room. Why? Because leaders understand something emotional people do not. Emotion is contagious. So is composure. If the leader leaks panic, panic multiplies. If the leader models calm, calm becomes possible. This is not about image. It is about responsibility. You have a choice. When pressure hits, will you infect the room with chaos? Or will you stabilize it with discipline? That's the key. Now look at the athlete under pressure. The crowd is loud. The clock is running out. The body is tired. The moment is heavy. But the best performers do not survive because they feel less. They survive because they reveal less. They stay inside themselves. They protect concentration. They do not waste energy on dramatic reactions to every mistake, every referee decision, every setback, every surge of doubt. Why? Because performance requires containment. You cannot execute with precision if your emotions are running loose. You cannot stay sharp if you are constantly externalizing frustration. You cannot dominate if you are busy displaying. Depth is power. Display is weakness. And then there is the parent who comes home exhausted. The day was hard. Work was heavy. The world was demanding. There is stress in the body and irritation in the mind. Now here comes the real test. Do you unload that weight onto the people who did not create it? Do you let your private stress become your family's atmosphere? Do you turn your pain into everybody else's problem? Or do you process it with discipline? This is where emotional adulthood begins. You are allowed to feel it. You are not required to perform it. That does not mean you never speak honestly. It does not mean you fake happiness. It means you stop making every emotional wave public property. It means you learn to pause before you spread. It means you learn to ask, what does this emotion need from me right now? Not, how fast can I dump this on someone else? That's the key. Private processing creates public strength. Read that carefully. Private processing creates public strength. A strong person has an inner system. They journal before they explode. They breathe before they answer. They walk before they text. They think before they confess. They calm the body before they enter the room. They do not use random people as containers for unprocessed emotion. That is discipline. It's not about repression, it's about regulation. It's not about pretending, it's about processing. It's not about silence, it's about stewardship. You have a choice. And here is where many people fail. They confuse honesty with exposure. They think that because something is real, it must be expressed immediately and fully. No. Real does not mean useful. True does not mean timely. Emotional does not mean wise. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is admit what you feel to yourself first, before you deliver it to someone else in a destructive form. Sometimes the strongest sentence in the world is not spoken out loud. Sometimes it is spoken internally. I am angry. I know that. But this is not the moment. I am hurt. I know that. But I will not bleed on everyone around me. I am stressed. I know that. But I will not make my emotions the atmosphere. Feel deeply. Respond deliberately. That is the standard. And once you live this way, your presence changes. You become less readable, less baitable, less fragile. harder to shake. That matters. Because composure is not just attractive. It is strategic. People trust calm people. They follow calm people. They fear calm people. They respect calm people. Why? Because calm suggests control. And control suggests power. Not loud power. Not theatrical power. Quiet power. The kind that does not need to prove itself. You don't need their permission to be composed. You don't need their permission to keep something private. You don't need their permission to process before responding. You don't need their permission to protect your inner world. That world is sacred. Guard it. Do not hand out emotional access to everyone who crosses your path. Not everyone deserves to see you unfiltered. Not everyone has earned your rawness. Not everyone can be trusted with your truth in its unfinished form. That is not dishonesty. That is discernment. That's the key. Now, let's make this practical. When emotion rises, do 3 things. First, name it privately. Not dramatically. Accurately. I feel embarrassed. I feel threatened. I feel disappointed. Second, delay expression. Not forever. Just long enough for intelligence to return. Take a breath. Take a walk. Drink water. Get distance. Sleep on it if needed. Third, decide the right form. Does this need a conversation? A boundary? A correction? A journal entry? A workout? Prayer? Silence? Action? You have a choice. That is what strong people do. They do not dump. They direct. And that is why they become hard to manipulate. Because the world cannot easily weaponize what you have learned to govern. Depth is power. Display is weakness. You are allowed to feel it. You are not required to perform it. Feel deeply. Respond deliberately. This is how you stop being ruled by the need to display every emotion. This is how you become composed, private, and powerful. You stopped reacting on command. Now you will learn how to control the space between feeling and action. Chapter 3. Delay the fire. Most people do not ruin their lives because of one giant catastrophe. They ruin their lives because they refuse to pause. They speak too fast. They reply too fast. They decide too fast. They react too fast. And then they spend months, sometimes years, cleaning up a mess that could have been prevented by 10 seconds of restraint. That is the lesson of this chapter. Your pause is your power. Read that slowly. Your pause is your power. Not your intensity. Not your speed. Not your emotional honesty in the heat of the moment. Your pause. The few seconds between what happens to you and what you do next determine more than most people will ever admit. They determine the quality of your relationships, the strength of your reputation, the clarity of your decisions, the stability of your future. That's the key. A pause is not weakness. A pause is command. A pause is where intelligence returns. A pause is where emotion stops driving and discipline takes the wheel. You have a choice. The moment the fire rises in you, you have a choice. Not a fantasy. Not a slogan. A real choice. You can obey the first impulse. Or you can delay the fire. And delaying the fire is often the entire difference between a powerful life and a chaotic one. Because most emotional destruction happens quickly. One text. One sentence. One outburst. One click. One decision made in anger. One reaction made in humiliation. One demand made in jealousy. One confession made in loneliness. One resignation sent in frustration. One post uploaded in ego. One moment of reaction can create permanent consequences. That is why you must learn this law. Do not give permanent consequences to temporary feelings. Again, Do not give permanent consequences to temporary feelings. This is one of the most practical forms of emotional restraint you will ever learn. You do not have to become emotionless. You do not have to become a monk. You do not have to become detached from life. You simply have to become skilled at waiting. Waiting before you speak. Waiting before you send. Waiting before you decide. Waiting before you escalate. Waiting before you destroy. Your pause is your power. Let's make this real. You receive a humiliating message. Maybe it is disrespectful. Maybe it is cold. Maybe it is unfair. Maybe it triggers every insecure part of you at once. And suddenly, the body gets hot. The heart races. The mind starts composing paragraphs. You want to answer immediately. You want to correct them. Hurt them back. Defend yourself. Reclaim control. This is the trap. Because what feels urgent is often emotional, not important. That's the key. The urge feels urgent because the ego is inflamed. But ego urgency is not the same as strategic necessity. In fact, the more urgent it feels, the more suspicious you should become. Urgency is often emotion wearing a disguise. So what do? You pause. You put the phone down. You leave the room. You breathe. You wait an hour. Maybe a night. Maybe a full day. And then you come back with a different mind. A calmer mind. A cleaner mind. A mind that is no longer trying to win a moment at the expense of a future. That is power. You have a choice. Most people think power is saying the sharp thing quickly. No. Power is being able to say it and choosing not to. Or saying it later, better, cleaner, and with control. That's the key. Take the heated meeting at work. Someone undermines you publicly. Cuts you off. Challenges your competence in front of other people. The old you wants to react instantly. You want to interrupt back. Raise your tone. Defend your intelligence. Show the room you are not the one to disrespect. But again, what feels urgent is often emotional, not important. If you lose control in that room, you may satisfy the ego for 30 seconds and damage your credibility for 30 months. So you pause. You let the meeting continue. You write down the point instead of blurting it out. You address the issue after the room cools down. Now your words carry weight because they are not contaminated by emotional leakage. Now you are not just reacting. You are choosing. That is the difference between adults and children. Children act from feeling. Adults act from principle. And too many grown people are still children with better vocabulary. It's not about speed, it's about discipline. It's not about expression, it's about timing. It's not about proving your strength, it's about protecting your mission. That's the key. And then there are decisions made while wounded. This is where people do some of their worst damage. They make decisions while angry. They make commitments while lonely. They make accusations while jealous. They make exits while hurt. They make promises while euphoric. And then later, when the emotion passes, they are left living inside a decision that was made by a temporary version of themselves. That is a dangerous way to live. Do not give permanent consequences to temporary feelings. When you are wounded, you are not seeing clearly. When you are furious, you are not thinking strategically. When you are jealous, you are not evaluating reality. When you are desperate, you are not choosing from strength. So delay. Delay the resignation. Delay the breakup speech. Delay the revenge. Delay the confession. Delay the purchase. Delay the response. Delay the decision. Your pause is your power. You do not need their permission to slow down. You do not need their permission to say, "I'll get back to you tomorrow." You do not need their permission to step outside. You do not need their permission to sleep on it. You do not need their permission to protect your future from your current emotions. That is maturity. And the deeper truth is this: instant reactions usually serve the ego. Measured responses serve the mission. The ego wants relief now. The mission wants results later. The ego wants to be seen, defended, validated, feared, or understood. The mission wants progress. The ego wants the last word. The mission wants the right outcome. The ego wants emotional discharge. The mission wants directional clarity. You have a choice. Every pause is a question. Will I serve the ego, or will I serve the mission? That's the key. This is not abstract. This is daily life. When your child frustrates you, pause before you shout. When your partner disappoints you, pause before you accuse. When your boss provokes you, pause before you answer. When your ex contacts you, pause before you reopen old wounds. When envy rises because of someone else's success, pause before you sabotage your focus with comparison. When shame hits after a mistake, pause before you turn one failure into a full collapse. In all of these moments, the pause saves you. Not because it removes emotion, because it gives emotion time to shrink back down to size. And emotions do shrink when they are not fed. That is something you must remember. Most emotions flare because you keep feeding them with thought, narrative, fantasy, and rehearsal. You replay the insult. You imagine the argument. You draft the message in your head. You justify the revenge. You build a case for reaction. Stop feeding it. Pause. Let the heat pass through the body without turning it into action. That is discipline. Here is a simple practice. When triggered, say this to yourself. Not now. That's it. Not now. Not never, if a response is needed. But not now. Not while the body is hot. Not while the ego is bleeding. Not while the mind is distorted. Not now. Then return when you can think. Return when your breathing is normal. Return when your voice is lower. Return when you can tell the truth without using it as a weapon. Feel the emotion, but delay the action. That is how restraint becomes real. Your pause is your power. What feels urgent is often emotional, not important. Do not give permanent consequences to temporary feelings. These are not just phrases. They are survival tools. They are leadership tools. They are relationship tools. They are the architecture of self-command. A person without pause is a person without protection. A person with pause becomes difficult to manipulate, difficult to bait, and difficult to destroy. Because between the world and their response, there is space. And inside that space, there is power. You are building that power now. You are learning that fire does not have to become damage. Emotion does not have to become action. Feeling does not have to become fate. You have a choice. That's the key. And once you learn to pause, another temptation appears. The temptation to broadcast every wound, every frustration, every disappointment to the world. So now that you can delay the fire, it is time to learn where not to pour it. Chapter 4. Stop announcing your pain. Pain makes people talk. That is one of the oldest patterns in the world. They get hurt, and they announce it. They get rejected, and they publish it. They get betrayed, and they perform it. They get disappointed, and they drag the wound through every conversation, every room, every platform, every relationship. And then they wonder why they still feel weak. Here is why. Because pain does not become strength when it is constantly displayed. Pain becomes strength when it is disciplined. That's the key. Not every wound deserves an audience. Read that again. Not every wound deserves an audience. This chapter is not against vulnerability. Let's be clear. Vulnerability has a place. Honesty has a place. Asking for help has a place. Speaking the truth in the right room, to the right person, at the right time, with the right purpose, is strength. But undisciplined exposure is not strength. It is leakage. It is emotional spillage. It is the habit of taking something raw, unresolved, and unstable and handing it to people who may not care, may not understand, and may not deserve access to it. That weakens your presence. Because the more you broadcast your hurt without structure, the more you train the world to see you as emotionally available for chaos. Easy to read. Easy to provoke. Easy to pity. Easy to ignore. You have a choice. You can suffer and sharpen. Or you can suffer and scatter. Most people scatter. That's why they stay stuck. Attention is not healing. Say it again. Attention is not healing. This is one of the biggest lies of modern life. People think that if enough people see their pain, validate their pain, comment on their pain, agree with their pain, then somehow the pain will become lighter. Sometimes it feels lighter for a moment. That is not healing. That is sedation. It is temporary relief dressed up as recovery. And temporary relief is dangerous when it keeps replacing real work. Because real healing is quiet. Real healing is repetitive. Real healing is often invisible. It looks like restraint. It looks like boundaries. It looks like changed habits. It looks like early mornings. It looks like no contact. It looks like therapy. It looks like training. It looks like prayer. It looks like journaling. It looks like deleting the draft instead of sending it. It looks like going to bed instead of posting your breakdown. Turn pain into discipline, not display. That's the key. Let's talk about oversharing after rejection. Someone leaves. Someone chooses someone else. Someone does not call back. Someone does not value you the way you wanted to be valued. And suddenly, there is a deep urge to tell everybody, to explain the story, to post indirect messages, to make sure the world knows what happened, to make sure the other person sees your suffering, to make sure someone witnesses the wound. Why? Because the ego wants company when it is bleeding. The ego wants the pain seen. The ego wants the rejection converted into sympathy. But sympathy does not rebuild your center. Structure does. You have a choice. You can tell the story 10 times and stay broken. Or you can sit with the pain long enough to ask a better question. What must this pain teach me? That's the key. Maybe it teaches you that you ignored red flags. Maybe it teaches you that you accepted crumbs because you were afraid to be alone. Maybe it teaches you that you were addicted to being chosen instead of committed to choosing wisely. Maybe it teaches you that your self-worth was too dependent on another person's attention. That lesson matters more than the performance. Because the lesson can change your future. The performance only keeps you emotionally exposed in the present. Not every wound deserves an audience. Now let's talk about betrayal. This is where many people completely lose discipline. Someone lies to you, uses you, exposes you, turns against you, and now the emotional mind wants to vent everywhere. Publicly, dramatically, immediately. And yes, the pain is real. But expression without direction becomes self-sabotage. That's the key. Because once you vent without control, a few things happen. First, you lose clarity. The more emotional noise you create, the harder it becomes to hear your own truth. Second, you hand power to the betrayer. They now get to watch you unravel. They now get evidence that they still control your nervous system. Third, you make your healing public before it has shape. That is dangerous. Because people are not always kind with unfinished pain. Some will gossip. Some will judge. Some will secretly enjoy your collapse. Some will pretend to care while collecting your weakness as information. You don't need their permission to be private. You don't need their permission to hold your pain with dignity. You don't need their permission to heal off stage. That is not hiding. That is wisdom. And wisdom asks one simple question. Who is actually qualified to hold this truth with me? Not who is available. Not who is curious. Not who is nearby. Who is qualified? Who is mature enough? Who is discreet enough? Who is wise enough? Who will help me process instead of just react? That distinction changes everything. Because emotionally undisciplined people dump pain on anyone. Emotionally mature people direct pain with intention. It's not about expression, it's about discernment. It's not about venting, it's about discipline. It's not about being seen, it's about being rebuilt. That's the key. And then there is the habit of emotionally dumping on people who neither care nor help. This is more common than most people admit. People call the wrong friend, text the wrong ex, open up to the wrong coworker, post for the wrong audience, reveal the wound in a room that has no medicine for it. And then they feel even more empty afterward. Of course they do. Because pain shared without purpose rarely heals. It just spreads. Attention is not healing. Some people want listeners when what they really need is structure. Some people want sympathy when what they really need is standards. Some people want emotional release when what they really need is a new system. That is the deeper work. Turn pain into discipline, not display. So what does that actually mean? It means when pain hits, you build. You do not just talk. You build. You create a morning routine because heartbreak exposed your lack of internal stability. You stop checking their page because betrayal exposed your addiction to emotional punishment. You start saving money because disappointment exposed how much chaos grows when your life has no structure. You go to therapy because the wound is older than the event. You start exercising because your body has become a storage unit for stress. You set a boundary because pain finally taught you what tolerance was costing you. This is healing with muscle. This is healing with direction. This is healing that changes identity. You have a choice. Always. When life cuts you, you can either become a performer of pain or a builder through pain. One gets attention. The other gets transformation. That's the key. And understand this. Some of the strongest people you know are not people who never suffered. They are people who suffered without making a theater out of it. They did not deny it. They did not numb it. They did not pretend it was not there. But they refused to become publicly ruled by it. They took the wound inward. They studied it. They honored it. And then they converted it into boundaries, into standards, into patience, into focus, into self-respect, into a quieter life. That is power. Not every wound deserves an audience. Some wounds deserve silence. Some deserve prayer. Some deserve a therapist. Some deserve a notebook. Some deserve a long walk. Some deserve time. And some deserve action so immediate and direct that words become unnecessary. That is the level you are moving toward. No more leaking. No more performing. No more mistaking visibility for healing. No more handing your unfinished pain to people who cannot carry it and should not see it. Protect your inner life. Honor your pain by disciplining it. Respect your future by refusing to turn every wound into a public event. Turn pain into discipline, not display. Attention is not healing. Not every wound deserves an audience. These are not just lines. These are rules for preserving dignity while rebuilding strength. Because emotional restraint is not only about controlling anger. It is about controlling exposure. It is about deciding what stays private until it has been refined into wisdom. You are learning to hold pain without becoming performative. You are learning to suffer without scattering yourself. You are learning to recover with structure instead of noise. And once you stop announcing your pain, you become capable of something even more powerful, letting silence carry weight that words never could. Chapter 5. Let silence do the heavy work. Most people talk too much. Not because they have wisdom, because they have anxiety. They speak to defend themselves. They speak to fill space. They speak to manage perception. They speak to explain what should be obvious. They speak because silence makes them feel exposed. And that is exactly why silence is power. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is pressure. Silence is control. Silence is the refusal to leak energy where discipline is required. That's the key. The weak explain. The strong build. Read that again. The weak explain. The strong build. This chapter matters because a reactive person does not only react with anger. A reactive person also reacts with words. Too many words. Unnecessary words. Defensive words. Panicked words. Self-protective words. Ego-soothing words. And every unnecessary word costs you something. It costs you mystery. It costs you leverage. It costs you presence. It costs you authority. You have a choice. When tension enters the room, you can rush to explain yourself. Or you can let silence do the heavy work. That is not passivity. That is command. Most people are desperate to be understood. That desperation is weakness. Not because understanding is bad, but because desperation always leaks. People can hear it in your voice. See it in your pacing. Feel it in the way you overtalk, overjustify, overclarify, and overshare. You start trying to control how others see you. And that is the trap. The moment you become obsessed with being understood by everyone, you become easy to manipulate. Because now your peace depends on their agreement. No. You don't need their permission to be clear. You don't need their permission to be innocent. You don't need their permission to be misunderstood temporarily. That's the key. Some people are committed to misunderstanding you. Let that sink in. They are not confused. They are committed. Committed to reading you wrong. Committed to twisting your words. Committed to making you defend yourself. Committed to dragging you into a courtroom where they are the judge, the jury, and the liar. And when you do not understand this, you waste enormous energy trying to explain yourself to people who were never listening in good faith. Stop doing that. Silence exposes what noise hides. Again. Silence exposes what noise hides. When you stop arguing with gossip, a strange thing happens. The gossip begins to reveal itself. When you stop feeding rumors with emotional explanations, the people spreading them lose momentum. When you stop trying to control every false narrative, the character of the liar becomes more visible than the lie. But if you panic and start chasing every whisper, every accusation, every opinion, now you look unstable. Now you look rattled. Now you look like someone without center. The weak explain. The strong build. That is not a slogan. It is a strategy. Imagine someone at work is speaking about you behind your back. The old you wants to confront everybody. Clear your name to every person in the building. Send long messages. Defend your intent. Make sure no one has the wrong idea. But what if that reaction creates more smoke than the gossip itself? What if your emotional defense makes the story bigger? What if the wiser move is silence, consistency, and clean work over time? You have a choice. You can chase perception, or you can build substance. One is fragile. The other is heavy. That's the key. And let's go deeper. Silence is uncomfortable for insecure people because silence removes the immediate chance to manage how you are seen. When you stop talking, you stop controlling the narrative through force. You must trust your conduct, your standards, your boundaries, your work, your patience. That terrifies people who are addicted to instant validation. So they fill the air. They explain too soon. They joke too much. They defend too fast. They confess too much. They answer questions nobody asked. Why? Because silence feels like exposure. But that discomfort is exactly where your growth begins. If you can sit in silence without rushing to rescue your image, you become powerful. Say less. Mean more. That's the key. Consider negotiation. This is one of the clearest places where silence creates leverage. Weak negotiators talk to relieve tension. Strong negotiators stay quiet long enough for truth to surface. They make the offer. Then they wait. They ask the question. Then they wait. They hear something incomplete. Then they wait. And because they wait, the other person often keeps talking. Reveals more. Shows insecurity. Lowers their own position. Exposes what noise would have hidden. Silence exposes what noise hides. That is why the person who can tolerate silence usually has more power in the room. Because silence forces revelation. People tell on themselves when you do not interrupt the moment with your own nervous talking. This is true in business. It is true in conflict. It is true in dating. It is true in leadership. It is true in family dynamics. The person who cannot stop talking often cannot stop reacting. The person who can remain quiet often remains in control. It's not about awkwardness, it's about discipline. It's not about withholding, it's about leverage. It's not about fear, it's about strength. That's the key. Now think about what happens when someone accuses you unfairly. The emotional mind wants to clear the record immediately. The disciplined mind asks a better question. Is this person actually seeking truth? If the answer is no, stop performing. Stop explaining your soul to people who are only cross-examining your weakness. Stop trying to win over people who are rewarded by your desperation. Stop begging for a fair hearing in a court built by bad faith. You don't need their permission to stop defending yourself. You don't need their permission to leave the conversation. You don't need their permission to let your life speak later. That is strength. And this is where people get confused. They think silence means you never speak. Wrong. Silence is not muteness. Silence is selectivity. You do speak when it serves the mission. You do speak when a boundary must be drawn. You do speak when clarity is required. You do speak when leadership demands it. But you stop speaking just to calm your own anxiety. That changes everything. Say less. Mean more. A short sentence with conviction has more power than 10 paragraphs soaked in insecurity. A boundary stated once has more force than a speech repeated 10 times. A quiet exit has more dignity than a dramatic finale. A consistent life has more authority than endless self-description. The weak explain. The strong build. So build. Build a reputation so strong you do not need to narrate your character every week. Build habits so disciplined you do not need motivational speeches to prove your seriousness. Build results so visible that explanation becomes unnecessary. Build emotional weight so that when you finally do speak, people listen. That is the real reward of mastering silence. You become heavier in the room. Not louder. Heavier. Your words stop sounding cheap because you do not throw them everywhere. Your presence becomes stronger because it is no longer cluttered by nervous explanation. Your boundaries become clearer because they are not buried under endless emotional language. And yes, silence will feel uncomfortable at first. You will feel the urge to fill the gap, to justify, to soften, to over-explain, to rescue yourself. Do not obey that urge. Sit still. Let the silence stretch. Let the other person reveal themselves. Let the moment breathe. Let your nervous system learn that you can survive not being instantly understood. That is growth. You have a choice. In every difficult moment, you have a choice. Fill the air and lose leverage. or hold your ground and gain it. Talk to discharge emotion, or stay quiet long enough for intelligence to return. Explain to be liked, or build to be respected. That's the key. The weak explain. The strong build. Silence exposes what noise hides. Say less. Mean more. These are not communication tricks. They are principles of self-command. They teach you how to stop bleeding energy through unnecessary speech. They teach you how to carry misunderstanding without collapsing. They teach you how to hold tension without selling your dignity for relief. And when you learn that, you stop trying to prove yourself in every room. You stop narrating your worth to people who have done nothing to earn that access. You stop talking for validation and start moving with purpose. That is where silence leads, not to emptiness, but to action. You learned how to hold your tongue. Now you must learn how to stop chasing approval with your life. Chapter 6. Stop proving and start moving. One of the biggest drains on human energy is the need to prove yourself. Prove you are smart enough. Prove you are worthy enough. Prove you are strong enough. Prove they were wrong about you. Prove you matter. Prove you belong. Prove you can win. And while you are busy proving, life is passing. That's the tragedy. Because proving feels productive, but it is often just emotional movement with no real progress. Proof is for spectators. Progress is for builders. Read that again. Proof is for spectators. Progress is for builders. This chapter matters because many people do not realize how much of their behavior is not driven by purpose. It is driven by wounded pride, by old rejection, by hidden insecurity, by the desperate need to be seen correctly by people who have no real authority over their future. That is a trap. And if you stay in that trap, you will waste years. You have a choice. You can build a life, or you can perform one. Most people perform. They do not choose a career because it fits their purpose. They choose it because it will impress somebody. They do not train because they love discipline. They train because they want someone to regret underestimating them. They do not grow because growth matters. They grow because they want applause. And applause is a terrible foundation. Because when the applause disappears, so does their motivation. That's the key. Emotional people seek validation. Disciplined people seek results. Validation says, "See me." Discipline says, "Watch what I become." Validation is addicted to the reaction. Discipline is committed to the mission. Validation looks outward. Discipline builds inward. You need to decide which one is running your life. Because if you are honest, much of your frustration probably comes from trying to prove your worth to doubters, critics, ex-partners, parents, friends, strangers, and ghosts from your past. And the truth is brutal. Some people will never be impressed. Some people will never apologize. Some people will never understand your value. Some people benefit from underestimating you because it helps them protect their own ego. So why are you building your life around changing their mind? You don't need their permission to move forward. You don't need their permission to grow. You don't need their permission to become excellent. You don't need their permission to stop explaining yourself. That's the key. The person obsessed with being recognized is often neglecting the work that would actually make recognition inevitable. Think about the person who spends years trying to get family approval. Everything becomes a performance. Every decision is filtered through, "Will they finally respect me now?" Every achievement is carried back home like evidence in a trial. "Look at me now. See me now. Approve me now." But if your peace depends on people finally seeing your worth, you are still not free. You are still reacting. Just in a quieter, more socially acceptable way. The reaction is no longer shouting. Now it is overachieving for the wrong audience. That is still bondage. Proof is for spectators. Progress is for builders. Now think about the entrepreneur obsessed with image instead of substance. Perfect branding. Perfect lifestyle photos. Perfect language. Perfect appearance of success. But behind it, weak systems, weak products, weak consistency, weak endurance. Because the focus is not on building something real. The focus is on looking like someone important. That is emotional behavior. It is insecurity wearing ambition as a costume. And it is everywhere. People want the symbols of strength more than the substance of it. They want to appear disciplined more than become disciplined. They want to look successful more than be useful. They want admiration without apprenticeship. That never lasts. Do not explain your value. Increase it. That's the key. If your business is weak, improve the product. If your body is soft, train it. If your mind is scattered, focus it. If your reputation is unclear, live more clearly. If your skill is average, sharpen it. If your life is unstable, structure it. Stop talking about what you deserve. Start becoming more difficult to deny. You have a choice. And here is where many people waste their best years. They confuse recognition with growth. Recognition is external. Growth is internal. Recognition can be delayed, denied, or stolen. Growth cannot. Recognition depends on other people's eyes. Growth depends on your standards. Which one do you trust more? That's the key. Take the student who is more focused on praise than competence. This person does not study to master the material. They study to be called talented. They do not want depth. They want approval. They do not want real capability. They want the emotional reward of being seen as gifted. And because of that, they avoid difficulty. They avoid embarrassment. They avoid the grind required to become truly dangerous. Why? Because praise addiction makes people fragile. They would rather protect the image of being smart than endure the process of becoming excellent. That is emotional weakness. It's not about talent, it's about discipline. It's not about recognition, it's about competence. It's not about being admired, it's about being built. That's the key. This is why energy spent proving is energy stolen from doing. Every speech you rehearse for doubters. Every fantasy you replay about showing them. Every social post crafted to signal success. Every argument where you defend your ambition to people who are committed to misunderstanding it. Every emotional hour spent chasing validation. That energy is gone. Gone from your training. Gone from your craft. Gone from your consistency. Gone from your real life. And the cruel irony is this: the more you chase validation, the less time you spend becoming valid. Do not explain your value. Increase it. That sentence should become your operating system. Someone doubts you. Work. Someone overlooks you. Work. Someone disrespects you. Work. Someone leaves you. Work. Someone misunderstands you. Work. Not frantic work. Not bitter work. Directed work. Quiet work. Consistent work. The kind of work that does not need witnesses. The kind of work that transforms you whether anyone claps or not. That is power. Because emotional restraint is not only about staying calm when insulted. It is about refusing to turn disrespect into a performance. It is about refusing to answer every wound with a speech. It is about turning reaction into redirection. That's the deeper lesson here. Stop reacting to disrespect with explanation. React with advancement. That is strategy. The ultimate revenge is not noise, but elevation. Read that again. The ultimate revenge is not noise, but elevation. You do not need to win every conversation. You do not need to correct every person who underestimated you. You do not need to make sure your critics understand your greatness in real time. Let your life speak after your mouth goes quiet. That's the key. This is not passive. This is brutal discipline. Because it is easy to talk, easy to threaten, easy to post, easy to announce what you will become, easy to say they will regret it, harder to disappear into the work, harder to build in silence, harder to improve without applause, harder to stay patient when no one notices. But that is exactly why it matters. Because the people who master this become untouchable. They stop seeking emotional victory. They start seeking structural victory. A better body, a sharper mind, a stronger business, a calmer spirit, a cleaner circle, a more disciplined life. That is what makes critics irrelevant. Not your defense, your development. You have a choice. Every time someone disrespects you, you have a choice. Turn it into drama, or turn it into fuel. Every time someone overlooks you, you have a choice. Complain about being unseen, or become undeniable. Every time your past tries to bait you into proving yourself, you have a choice. Chase closure, or build a future so solid that closure becomes unnecessary. That's the key. And here is the final truth. Proving never ends for insecure people. There is always another audience, another doubter, another benchmark, another person whose approval feels important. So if you build your life around proving, you will never rest. But if you build your life around purpose, you become stable. Because purpose does not need applause. Purpose needs obedience. Purpose needs consistency. Purpose needs sacrifice. Purpose needs silence. Proof is for spectators. Progress is for builders. Do not explain your value. Increase it. Let your life speak after your mouth goes quiet. These are not just motivational lines. They are corrections. They are a call out of emotional slavery and into strategic focus. They remind you that your energy is precious, your attention is limited, and your future is too important to be spent performing for people who do not matter. Stop proving. Start moving. Stop announcing. Start building. Stop reacting. Start advancing. That is how emotional restraint becomes visible in your life. Not just through calm words, but through redirected force. You stop giving your energy to spectators. You start investing it in construction. And once you do that, something powerful happens. You begin to notice exactly what still has the power to provoke you. That is where the next level begins. Chapter 7. Master the trigger, master the game. A trigger is not random. It is not accidental. It is not just how you are. A trigger is a revelation. It shows you where you are still weak. It shows you where your past still controls your present. It shows you where your emotions still outrank your discipline. That's the key. Most people hate being triggered. They resent it. They blame it. They avoid it. They build their whole personality around defending it. But that is the wrong response. Because your trigger is your teacher. Read that again. Your trigger is your teacher. Anything that repeatedly provokes insecurity, rage, jealousy, panic, shame, or defensiveness is not just annoying. It is instructional. It is pointing to unfinished inner work. It is revealing a place where your self-command is still under construction. That should not discourage you. It should wake you up. Because the goal is not to pretend you are unbothered. The goal is to become less owned. And right now, whatever disturbs you most still has access to your mind, your body, your decisions, and your direction. What disturbs you still owns you. That sentence is uncomfortable. Good. It is supposed to be. Because growth begins when excuses end. You have a choice. You can keep blaming the world for touching your wounds. or you can finally train the wound. That's the key. This chapter is where emotional restraint becomes more than behavior. It becomes diagnosis. It becomes mapping. It becomes intelligence. Every reaction becomes a clue. Every surge of emotion becomes information. Every repeated collapse becomes a training ground. That is how serious people grow. They stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" They start asking, "What is this showing me about me?" Your trigger is your teacher. Now let's get specific. Someone criticizes you. Maybe not even harshly. Maybe just directly. Maybe they question your idea, your work, your habits, your tone. And instantly, something rises in you. Defensiveness. Heat. A need to explain. A need to protect yourself. A need to strike back. Why? Maybe because criticism is not hitting your present self. Maybe it is hitting an older wound. Maybe you grew up in an environment where correction felt like rejection. Maybe being wrong once meant being shamed. Maybe mistakes were punished instead of guided. So now, every time someone points out a flaw, your body reacts as if your worth is under attack. That matters. Because now you understand something powerful. The problem is not just criticism. The problem is the meaning your nervous system attaches to criticism. Do not hate the trigger. Study it. That's the key. Ask better questions. Why do I react so strongly to being corrected? What story am I telling myself in that moment? What old pain is being activated? What am I trying to defend? You are not interrogating yourself to feel broken. You are studying yourself to become dangerous. Because once you know the root, you can train the response. You can learn to hear feedback without collapsing. You can separate correction from condemnation. You can breathe before you defend. You can let truth improve you instead of letting ego protect you. That is growth. It's not about sensitivity, it's about discipline. It's not about the criticism, it's about your conditioning. That's the key. Now consider rejection. For many people, rejection does not just sting. It destroys proportion. One unanswered message becomes a personal crisis. One romantic disappointment becomes proof of unworthiness. One closed door becomes a full identity collapse. Why? Because rejection is often touching a deeper fear. The fear of not being enough. The fear of not being chosen. The fear of being forgettable. And if that fear lives inside you untrained, then every rejection will feel bigger than it is. Again, this is why emotional restraint matters. Not so you can feel nothing. So you can interpret correctly. You have a choice. When rejection happens, you can make it mean, "I am not enough." Or you can make it mean, "This did not align." One interpretation wounds your identity. The other protects your center. That's the key. Do not hate the trigger. Study it. Why does being rejected feel like being erased? Why do I need this person, this opportunity, this response, this approval to confirm my worth? What part of me still depends on being chosen to feel valuable? That is not weakness to ask. That is strength. Because now you are no longer just reacting. You are tracing the wire. You are finding the source. You are learning what still rules you. What disturbs you still owns you. And then there is being ignored. This trigger controls more people than they admit. Someone does not text back. Someone withholds attention. Someone does not acknowledge your presence, your effort, your importance. And suddenly, your system becomes chaotic. You want to chase. You want to force clarity. You want to make them respond. You want to regain control. That reaction is telling you something. It may be telling you that silence from others makes you feel powerless. It may be telling you that you are addicted to feedback. It may be telling you that uncertainty makes you panic because you do not know how to remain whole without external reassurance. That matters, because once you see it, you can train it. Your trigger is your teacher. If being ignored throws you into desperation, the lesson may be this: you still need too much from other people. Too much reassurance. Too much immediate feedback. Too much evidence that you matter. That is not a moral failure, but it is a weakness if you do not train it. You don't need their permission to feel steady. You don't need their permission to feel valuable. You don't need their permission to remain composed in uncertainty. That's the key. This is why blaming the world never solves the problem. Yes, people can be rude. Yes, people can be careless. Yes, people can expose your wounds unfairly. But if you spend your whole life blaming the trigger, you will never strengthen the part of you that keeps reacting to it. You will become highly educated in what is wrong with everyone else, while remaining untrained in what still governs you. That is not power. Power says, if this keeps disturbing me, I need to understand why. Power says, if this keeps breaking my composure, I need to build a stronger internal response. Power says, the world may not stop triggering me, so I must stop being so easily ruled. You have a choice. Excuse the weakness, or train it. That's the key. Here is the practical method. First, catch the pattern. Not once. Repeatedly. What triggers keep returning? Criticism, disrespect, being ignored, comparison, success of others, lack of control. Second, name the emotion precisely. Not, I'm upset. That is lazy. Name it. I feel embarrassed. I feel ashamed. I feel replaced. I feel powerless. I feel exposed. Precision creates leverage. Third, ask what belief sits underneath it. What am I believing right now? That I am not enough. That I must be admired. That I cannot tolerate uncertainty. That being challenged means being diminished. Now you are getting somewhere. Fourth, build a replacement response. If criticism triggers shame, practice saying, feedback is information, not an attack. If rejection triggers unworthiness, practice saying, this outcome does not define my value. If being ignored triggers control issues, practice not chasing. Sit in the discomfort. Train stillness. This is how triggers become training. Do not hate the trigger. Study it. That's the key. Emotional restraint is not just about hiding reactions. It is about using them. Using them as maps. Using them as mirrors. Using them as evidence of what must still be strengthened. Every reaction is data. Every emotional surge is information. Every repeated collapse is a message. The question is whether you are wise enough to read it. Weak people only feel the trigger. Strong people investigate it. Weak people demand the world become softer. Strong people become steadier. Weak people personalize every disturbance. Strong people convert disturbance into instruction. That is self-mastery. And self-mastery is not clean. It is not glamorous. It is often humbling. Because to master yourself, you must first admit what still controls you. You must admit that criticism still hooks you. That rejection still shrinks you. That comparison still distracts you. That silence still scares you. That disrespect still tempts you into proving. Good. Now you know where to work. What disturbs you still owns you. Your trigger is your teacher. Do not hate the trigger. Study it. These are not just lines. They are a framework for becoming harder to manipulate and harder to break. They teach you to stop treating reactions like accidents and start treating them like signals. They turn emotional restraint into a form of self-education. And once you learn from your triggers, you are ready for the next level. Because it is not enough to understand your emotional patterns. You must train your body and mind to hold steady under pressure. Awareness is the beginning. Conditioning is what makes it real. Chapter 8. Build a nervous system that doesn't break. By now, you understand the mental side of emotional restraint. You understand reaction. You understand silence. You understand triggers. You understand the pause. That is necessary, but it is not enough. Because composure is not built by ideas alone. It is built by conditioning. It is built by repetition. It is built by how you sleep, how you breathe, how you recover, how you train, how you handle stress before the crisis ever arrives. That's the key. Calm is trained, not gifted. Read that again. Calm is trained, not gifted. Some people think emotional control is a personality trait. They think some people are just naturally steady, naturally grounded, naturally hard to shake. Sometimes that is partly true. But more often, what looks like natural calm is trained capacity. It is a nervous system that has been prepared. It is a body that has been regulated. It is a life that has been structured. It is a mind that has been repeatedly taught not to panic. You have a choice. You can keep treating emotional restraint like a motivational idea, or you can start building it like a physical skill, because that is what it is, a skill. And every skill must be trained. A weak system creates a reactive mind. That sentence explains more human behavior than most people realize. If your body is exhausted, you will be more irritable. If your sleep is broken, you will be more impulsive. If your breathing is shallow, you will feel more threatened. If your routines are chaotic, your emotions will follow. If your body is constantly overloaded, your reactions will become sharper, faster, and less intelligent. And then you will call it personality. You will say, "That's just how I am." No. That is often how your system is functioning. That's the key. It's not about temperament, it's about training. It's not about mood, it's about regulation. It's not about becoming someone else, it's about conditioning the version of you that can hold pressure without collapse. Look at athletes. The great ones do not remain composed in competition by accident. They train under pressure. They repeat movements under fatigue. They rehearse under noise. They practice with failure, speed, stress, and uncertainty built into the process. Why? Because they know something most people ignore. You cannot expect calm in the moment if you never trained under strain before the moment. When the game gets loud, the trained body remembers. When the pressure rises, the conditioned mind narrows. When the stakes increase, the prepared system does not need to invent composure. It retrieves it. Calm is trained, not gifted. Now look at military composure. Why can some people move with clarity in chaos while others freeze or explode? Training, repetition, exposure, breathing, protocol. Drill after drill after drill until panic loses some of its power. That does not mean they feel nothing. It means they have trained what to do when feeling surges. That is a massive distinction. Emotional restraint is not the absence of intensity. It is the presence of preparation. That's the key. And this applies to ordinary life more than people admit. You do not need to be an athlete or a soldier to need a strong nervous system. You need it to parent well. You need it to lead. You need it to handle conflict. You need it to stay calm during money pressure. You need it to navigate uncertainty. You need it to keep from turning every hard day into an emotional accident. A weak system creates a reactive mind. So let's make this practical. Start with sleep. Yes, sleep. Not because it sounds impressive, because it is foundational. A chronically sleep-deprived person is not operating with full emotional discipline. They are operating with reduced patience, reduced impulse control, reduced perspective, and reduced resilience. They are easier to provoke because their system is already overloaded. You have a choice. You can keep glorifying exhaustion, or you can treat rest like part of your emotional training. That's the key. Then breathing. Most reactive people breathe badly. Fast, shallow, high in the chest, always slightly braced. And then they wonder why they feel under attack by life. Because your breathing pattern teaches your body how safe or unsafe the world is. If you breathe like you are in danger all day, your body will prepare for danger all day. That means more tension, more irritability, more reactivity, more urgency. So train the breath. Slow it down. Lengthen the exhale. Use your breath before meetings, before hard conversations, before entering the house, before responding to conflict. Not because it is trendy, because it works. You don't need their permission to regulate yourself. You don't need their permission to pause and breathe. You don't need their permission to stop carrying chaos in your chest. That is discipline. Then routines. Chaos in lifestyle creates chaos in emotion. If you wake at random times, eat poorly, move rarely, stare at screens endlessly, live without structure, and constantly overload yourself, do not be surprised when your emotional world becomes unstable. Your body is not separate from your mind. Your habits are not separate from your reactions. The way you live trains the way you respond. That's the key. Train calm in private so you can keep it in public. Again. Train calm in private so you can keep it in public. This means your private life must support your public composure. If you want to be steady under pressure, then build daily practices that create steadiness. Walk every day. Lift weights. Stretch. Sleep on time. Reduce stimulants if they make you volatile. Eat in a way that supports energy instead of crashes. Create quiet moments. Protect your mornings. Protect your evenings. Stop flooding your system with noise and then acting surprised when your emotions are loud. A weak system creates a reactive mind. Now let's go deeper. Repeated exposure matters. Many people stay emotionally fragile because they avoid all discomfort. They never practice stress in controlled conditions. They never challenge themselves physically. Never rehearse hard conversations. Never sit with uncertainty. Never build tolerance for boredom, silence, or pressure. Then when life hits, they shatter. Why? Because avoidance weakens capacity. You have a choice. Hide from stress and stay fragile. Or engage stress intelligently and grow stronger. That's the key. This is why cold showers help some people. Why hard workouts help. Why difficult conversations help. Why deadlines, public speaking, disciplined routines, and deliberate discomfort all matter. Not because suffering is holy. Because capacity is built through dosage. A little stress, handled well, teaches the system not to panic. A little discomfort, endured intentionally, teaches the mind that it can survive without drama. A little pressure, repeated over time, turns chaos into something more familiar. And familiar things are less terrifying. Calm is trained, not gifted. But here is the warning. Training is not the same as self-destruction. You do not build a strong nervous system by abusing yourself. You build it through stress and recovery, challenge and repair, effort and restoration. That matters. Because some people are not weak from lack of pressure. They are weak from never recovering. They stay overstimulated, overworked, overconnected, overcaffeinated, emotionally flooded, always on, always reachable, always consuming, always reacting. That is not strength. That is system fatigue. And a fatigued system cannot regulate well. So recovery becomes part of discipline. Silence, rest, stillness, walks without noise, time away from the phone, moments without performance, prayer, breathing, reflection, real recovery, not just distraction. That's the key. Here is the core law of this chapter. You do not rise to your ideals under pressure. You fall to your level of preparation. Read that slowly. You do not rise to your ideals under pressure. You fall to your level of preparation. This is why good intentions are not enough. In the moment of conflict, you will not magically become calm because you believe in calm. In the moment of stress, you will not magically become disciplined because you admire discipline. In the moment of chaos, your system will reveal what it has practiced. So practice. Practice calm when nothing dramatic is happening. Practice slow breathing when no one is attacking you. Practice silence when no one is demanding words. Practice structure before life becomes unstable. Practice recovery before burnout forces it. Train calm in private so you can keep it in public. That is how emotional restraint becomes physical reality. Not theory. Not slogans. Capacity. Conditioning. Nervous system strength. You have a choice. Build a life that supports composure. Or keep living in ways that manufacture reactivity. Build routines that stabilize you. Or keep depending on willpower alone. Train your body to carry pressure. Or keep wondering why every hard moment feels like an emergency. That's the key. Calm is trained, not gifted. A weak system creates a reactive mind. Train calm in private so you can keep it in public. These are not wellness phrases. They are laws of self-mastery. They remind you that your body and mind are not separate battles. They are one system. And if that system is weak, your emotions will keep hijacking your future. Now you are becoming harder to shake. You understand your triggers. You are building real capacity. But strength is not proven in comfort. It is proven when life gets unfair, humiliating, and hard. That is the next test. Chapter 9. Keep your dignity in the storm. It is easy to look composed when life is cooperating. It is easy to speak calmly when you are comfortable. It is easy to act mature when nothing is being threatened. That is not the real test. The real test is what happens when life hits hard. When you are betrayed. When you are humiliated. When you are rejected. When you are publicly disrespected. When you lose money. When you lose certainty. When you lose someone. That is where character becomes visible. That's the key. Your character is loudest when your life gets hard. Read that again. Your character is loudest when your life gets hard. Not when things are smooth. Not when conditions are favorable. Not when your plans are working. When your heart is broken. When your ego is bruised. When the room turns against you. When the future becomes unclear. That is where emotional restraint stops being a concept and becomes identity. Because anyone can look disciplined in peace. The question is, who are you in the storm? You have a choice. Always. Even there. Especially there. You can suffer and stay intact. Or you can suffer and become cheap. And many people become cheap the moment pain enters the room. They beg where they should bless and release. They lash out where they should hold the line. They collapse where they should stay standing. They become petty, loud, theatrical, and self-destructive the moment life wounds them. Why? Because pain strips away performance. Pain reveals what is real. That's why this chapter matters. Do not let pain make you cheap. Again. Do not let pain make you cheap. There is a certain kind of dignity that can only be seen under pressure. It is not about pretending not to hurt. It is not about acting unaffected. It is not about fake stoicism or emotional numbness. It is about refusing to betray your own standards just because life betrayed your expectations. That is maturity. That is power. That is emotional restraint at its highest level. Let's start with heartbreak. Someone leaves. Someone lies. Someone chooses another path. Someone who once wanted you now walks away from you. And the emotional mind goes to war. It wants to beg. It wants to negotiate. It wants to send one more message, one more paragraph, one more emotional appeal. It wants to say, "Please see me. Please stay. Please give me closure. Please confirm that I still matter." But dignity asks a harder question. What does this pain tempt me to do that would lower me? That's the key. Heartbreak is painful. But heartbreak is not permission to abandon self-respect. You can grieve without groveling. You can hurt without humiliating yourself. You can miss someone without chasing someone who has already made their position clear. Lose the moment if you must. Do not lose yourself. That line matters. Because some losses are unavoidable. Relationships end. People disappoint you. Things fall apart. You may lose the moment. You may lose the person. You may lose the vision you built in your mind. But you do not have to lose yourself with it. You do not have to trade your dignity for one more temporary chance at relief. You don't need their permission to walk away with self-respect. You don't need their permission to stop begging. You don't need their permission to heal without performing your pain. That is strength. Now let's talk about failure. Failure exposes people. Not because failure is shameful, but because failure activates everything weak in the undisciplined mind. Shame, panic, comparison, self-hatred, hopelessness. Many people do not fail once. They fail, then emotionally destroy themselves on top of the failure. That second collapse is optional. That's the key. Failure may be real, but self-destruction is a decision. A bad quarter does not require an identity crisis. A rejected application does not require you to call yourself worthless. A public mistake does not require you to unravel your entire life. A missed opportunity does not require you to become reckless, bitter, and self-abandoning. You have a choice. You can take the hit and remain upright. Or you can help the hit destroy what it did not actually touch. That is what many people do. Life bruises one part of them, and they hand over the rest. One failed project becomes neglect of the body. One rejection becomes neglect of discipline. One mistake becomes binging, numbing, isolating, quitting. That is emotional surrender. Do not let pain make you cheap. Cheap people collapse completely. Dignified people absorb pain and remain ordered. Not perfect. Ordered. That is the difference. And then there is public disrespect. This one catches people fast. Someone embarrasses you in a room. Someone questions you openly. Someone insults you in front of others. Now the blood gets hot. The ego screams, "Do something now." Retaliate. Dominate. Destroy them. Make sure no one thinks you are weak. But again, the emotional mind confuses display with strength. The disciplined mind remembers that theatrical retaliation often makes you smaller, not stronger. Your character is loudest when your life gets hard. And that includes social pressure. Can you hold your posture when embarrassed? Can you stay measured when attacked? Can you answer clearly without becoming chaotic? Can you let a moment pass without making it worse? That is real command. Because dignity is not preserved by winning every situation. It is preserved by refusing to collapse inside it. That's the key. Sometimes the strongest move is not the sharpest comeback. It is restraint. It is brevity. It is a calm sentence. It is a quiet exit. It is addressing the issue later, privately, cleanly, and without spectacle. That is not weakness. That is emotional wealth. A poor mind spends itself immediately. A strong mind invests response carefully. Lose the moment if you must. Do not lose yourself. This is where restraint becomes identity. The calm person is not someone who never suffers. That is fantasy. The calm person is someone who refuses to become small in response to suffering. Refuses to become petty. Refuses to become vindictive. Refuses to become manipulative. Refuses to become dramatic just because drama would temporarily soothe the ego. That is who you are building. A person whose pain does not turn them into a lesser version of themselves. It's not about avoiding pain, it's about preserving discipline. It's not about winning every battle, it's about keeping your character. It's not about controlling life, it's about controlling what life pulls out of you. That's the key. And uncertainty belongs here too. Many people can handle pain better than uncertainty. Pain is clear. Uncertainty is fog. Not knowing what will happen next. Not knowing whether something will work. Not knowing whether someone is staying or going. Not knowing how long the storm will last. That fog makes people reckless. They rush. They force. They overtalk. They overreach. They make desperate decisions just to escape the discomfort of not knowing. But dignity requires patience inside uncertainty. You have a choice. When life becomes unclear, you can panic and grab at control. Or you can stay steady long enough for clarity to return. That is not passive. That is disciplined endurance. And endurance is part of character. Your character is loudest when your life gets hard. That means when money gets tight, watch your character. When relationships strain, watch your character. When grief enters, watch your character. When you are embarrassed, ignored, bypassed, and misunderstood, watch your character. Not because you should become robotic, but because storms reveal whether your principles are real or just decorative. Anybody can say they value self-respect. The storm asks, will you keep it? Anybody can say they value composure. The storm asks, will you keep it? Anybody can say they have standards. The storm asks, will you keep them when pain offers you an easier, uglier option? That's the key. Here is the practical standard for hard times. When you are hurting, reduce 3 things immediately. Reduce unnecessary speech. Reduce impulsive decisions. Reduce public emotion. Not because your pain is invalid, because your pain is vulnerable, and vulnerable states require protection. Then increase 3 things. Increase structure. Increase recovery. Increase honesty with yourself. Tell the truth privately. I am hurt. I am angry. I feel humiliated. I want to react. Good. Now ask, what response would protect my dignity? Not my ego. My dignity. That question can save you. Because ego wants the moment. Dignity wants the self. And the self matters more. Do not let pain make you cheap. Your character is loudest when your life gets hard. Lose the moment if you must. Do not lose yourself. These are not just phrases for surviving emotional storms. They are identity statements. They remind you that restraint is not weakness in suffering. It is nobility in suffering. It is how you remain someone you can respect after the storm passes. And that matters more than getting even. More than looking strong. More than winning the scene. Because in the end, the greatest victory is this. Life hit you hard, and still it could not turn you into someone smaller. Now you are ready for the final level, where restraint becomes more than a tactic in hard moments. It becomes a permanent standard of power. Chapter 10. Become untouchable through self-mastery. This is the final level. Not looking strong. Not sounding strong. Not performing strength. Becoming governed. Becoming so internally disciplined that the world can no longer easily pull you out of position. That is real power. That is the power this entire book has been building toward. Self-mastery is silent power. Read that again. Self-mastery is silent power. The most dangerous person in any room is rarely the loudest, rarely the angriest, rarely the most expressive, rarely the one making the biggest show of confidence. No. The most dangerous person is the most governed. The one who feels pressure but does not bend to it. The one who gets insulted but does not become cheap. The one who faces temptation but does not surrender direction. The one who remains in command of thought, tone, energy, timing, and action. That person is hard to manipulate, hard to bait, hard to distract, hard to defeat. That's the key. When you cannot be provoked, you cannot be easily defeated. Again. When you cannot be provoked, you cannot be easily defeated. This does not mean life stops hurting you. It does not mean people stop trying you. It does not mean pressure disappears. It means pressure no longer owns your behavior. And that changes everything. Because most people lose long before the final outcome. They lose in their reactions. They lose in the delay they create through drama. They lose in the damage they do to trust. They lose in the words they should not have said. They lose in the impulses they should not have followed. They lose in the emotional leaks that weaken their position over time. You have a choice. You can keep living as an emotional hostage. Or you can become someone the world cannot easily move. That is the final call of this chapter. And understand this clearly. Self-mastery is not stiffness. It is not emotional suppression. It is not becoming robotic. It is not pretending to be above life. It is deeper than that. It is emotional honesty with behavioral discipline. You feel it. You name it. You contain it. You direct it. That's the key. Elite leaders understand this. When crisis hits, they do not have the luxury of emotional chaos. People are watching. Systems depend on them. Decisions matter. Timing matters. Clarity matters. They may feel fear. They may feel pressure. They may feel doubt. But they do not let those feelings run the room. Why? Because leadership is not about having no emotion. Leadership is about refusing to let emotion become policy. That is power. That is governance. That is silent strength. The same is true of disciplined creators, writers, builders, founders, artists, craftsmen. The people who create meaningful work over years are not always the most inspired. Often, they are simply the most governed. They do not stop every time they feel discouraged. They do not abandon the mission every time they feel uncertain. They do not confuse a bad day with a broken path. They stay with it. They return to the work. They keep the promises they made to themselves. That is self-mastery in action. Not motivation. Governance. It's not about intensity, it's about consistency. It's not about feelings, it's about direction. That's the key. And look at high performers in any field. They win not because they never feel pressure. They win because pressure does not own their behavior. That distinction matters. Anyone can look composed when things are easy. But the people who rise over years, not just moments, are the ones whose behavior remains disciplined when conditions stop being friendly. They do the work when tired. They remain respectful when challenged. They stay measured when attacked. They think clearly when stakes are high. They recover quickly when they fail. They do not hand over their future to temporary emotion. When you cannot be provoked, you cannot be easily defeated. That is why emotional control compounds. At first, it feels personal. You are just trying not to react. Just trying not to spiral. Just trying not to say the wrong thing, text the wrong person, make the wrong decision. But over time, something bigger happens. People begin to trust you because you are steady. People begin to respect you because you are not theatrical. People begin to listen more carefully because your words are not cheap. People begin to follow you because your presence feels governed. This is how restraint turns into authority. Not fake authority. Not loud authority. Earned authority. The kind that comes from consistency over time. That's the key. Emotional control compounds into trust, authority, consistency, and influence. Why? Because the world is full of unstable people. People who can talk but not hold. People who can promise but not sustain. People who can start but not continue. People who can feel deeply but cannot direct those feelings into disciplined living. So when someone appears who is composed, measured, focused, and emotionally clean, they stand out. Not because they are flashy, because they are rare. You can become that rare. You have a choice. And this is where restraint must stop being a tactic and become a code. Up to this point, you may have seen emotional restraint as something you use in certain situations. When insulted, when triggered, when pressured, when rejected. That is good. But now it must become deeper. It must become who you are. A life code. A standard. A governing principle. Not, I will try to stay calm when needed. No. I am a person who does not surrender behavior to emotion. That is different. That is identity. That is self-respect. That is self-mastery. Self-mastery is silent power. Now let's make this practical for the rest of your life. Become the person who pauses before speaking. Become the person who does not chase every misunderstanding. Become the person who can feel anger without becoming reckless. Become the person who can feel grief without becoming self-destructive. Become the person who can feel jealousy without becoming bitter. Become the person who can feel fear without becoming dishonest. Become the person who can feel pressure without becoming chaotic. That is the challenge. Not to feel less. To govern more. You don't need their permission to be disciplined. You don't need their permission to be calm. You don't need their permission to stop performing your pain. You don't need their permission to outgrow reaction. You don't need their permission to become formidable in silence. That's the key. And notice what happens when you live this way. Insults lose power. Temptations lose speed. Fear loses volume. Disrespect loses access. Chaos loses influence. Other people's moods stop becoming your instructions. The world still makes noise, but the noise no longer runs your life. Master yourself, and the world loses its grip on you. Read that again. Master yourself, and the world loses its grip on you. That is what it means to become untouchable. Not physically untouchable. Not socially untouchable. Internally untouchable. Anchored. Directed. Difficult to destabilize. Able to move through praise without arrogance and criticism without collapse. Able to move through success without vanity and failure without self-hatred. Able to move through pressure without panic and through pain without performance. That is a dangerous person, because that is a free person. And freedom is the real reward here. Not domination over others. Domination over the self. Not controlling every situation. Controlling what each situation awakens in you. Not forcing the world to become softer. Becoming stronger, calmer, clearer, and less available for emotional manipulation. That is the victory. When you cannot be provoked, you cannot be easily defeated. Self-mastery is silent power. Master yourself, and the world loses its grip on you. These are not just final lines. They are the code. They are the standard. They are the final warning against living carelessly with your emotions and the final invitation into a stronger life. So here is the closing challenge of this chapter. Stop admiring self-mastery from a distance. Practice it daily. When tired, when offended, when ignored, when praised, when tempted, when stressed, when wounded. Show yourself that your emotions can be acknowledged without becoming your master. Show yourself that discipline can be stronger than impulse. Show yourself that purpose can outrank mood. You have a choice. Always. And every time you choose governance over reaction, you become a little more unshakable, a little more dangerous, a little more free. You have learned how to stop reacting like a slave. You have learned how to feel without leaking, pause without collapsing, suffer without performing, and endure without becoming cheap. Now the lesson is complete. Emotional restraint is not one skill among many. It is the structure that protects all the others. Master yourself, and everything changes. Now you understand the truth. Emotional restraint is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming dangerous in the right way. It is the power to feel anger without becoming reckless, to feel pain without becoming pathetic, to feel pressure without breaking discipline. Every chapter has pointed to the same law. Your reaction is either your weakness or your weapon. Every time you pause instead of explode, every time you stay silent instead of proving, every time you choose dignity over drama, you reclaim power that most people throw away for temporary relief. That is what mental toughness is. It is not loud. It is not theatrical. It is controlled. So from this moment on, watch your reactions like your future depends on them, because it does. The challenge is simple. For the next 7 days, do not give the world one unnecessary emotional reaction. Not one. Observe more. Speak less. Choose slowly. Control completely. And prove, through your discipline, that your mind belongs to you.